Hello and welcome to the Shaman's View. I'm Dr. Alberto Villoldo. Today I'd like to share with you the story of the most dreaded, feared shaman in the entire Amazon. His name was Moxo, and even today you hear lore and legend about this great shaman. He was feared because the spirit of the rainforest acted through him. He was one of these great keepers of balance. There's one story in which he confronted a sorcerer, and they agreed in the dream time that they would meet physically by the edge of the river. And the sorcerer showed up with all of his paraphernalia and his staffs and his rattles, and Moxo showed up only with his spirit water, with the spritzing water that he prepared with his sacred plants and flowers. And they sat 100 meters away from each other in meditation, and the sorcerer summoned his power animal of a great boa constrictor that slithered up the beach. And Moxo called on his spirit animal, which was an anaconda. In this case, he summoned the anaconda. The anaconda knows the ways of the depths of the waters and the ways of the high trees. And the two serpents battled each other, and at the end of the day, they each returned to their master. No one had defeated the other. The following day, Moxo showed up at the beach. The sorcerer was already there with his boa constrictor, and all he had with him was his spirit water and two feathers. When the sorcerer summoned his boa, this great 20-foot-long creature appeared, and Moxo went into his spirit form, and in his luminous body he went up to the snake and he cut the cords that connected that great serpent to the sorcerer. When the cords that were connecting the serpent to the sorcerer were cut, the serpent collapsed. It was no longer under the control of the puppeteer, which was the sorcerer. The spirit of nature claimed this great serpent again. The serpent dissolved, and the sorcerer came out of his reverie and bowed to Moxo and left and never came back again. Years later, there was a great battle happening between two rubber barons. This was the time when the rubber trees were being tapped to manufacture tires for the Europeans. And these two great rubber barons were there. They were not rubber, they were rubber, but they were thieves in effect. They were stealing from the jungle and from the native peoples to ship back to Europe this valuable resource. Moxo convened a meeting between the two on a river and on a riverboat. These two barons each had their own armies and they were ready to go to battle. And he convened a meeting between the two with no bodyguards, just the two lords of the forest, and he would be the mediator. After 3 days, when they did not come out, both sides went to look for their masters, and both of them were dead. They had been strangled, they had been choked, and all that was left was a trail of a serpent, of a great anaconda, that was left on the banks of the river. Moxo had restored the balance of the rainforest by eliminating the intruders, the men that were exploiting the jungle, cutting it down for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the entire rainforest. So Moxo was the voice of the mother, the voice of the rainforest. And she could act through him to bring balance to the entire rainforest by intervening with the guilty, with the perpetrators. Now, when this does not happen, the entire village has to pay for the imbalance. And the shamans of old knew this. They knew that when somebody was exploiting power for their own good, they were using the forces of nature, binding them with cords, that these cords had to be cut, that nature could not be domesticated by man. and that these men had to be punished. And they extracted punishment, much like the old Taoist priest did in Asia. They maintained balance by disconnecting ruthless tyrants from the source of their power. And when these men and women that were the balance keepers of the rainforest were no longer available, then the entire village had to pay. The entire planet had to pay. Much like we are doing today with these plagues and infestations that are affecting all of humanity. All of humanity has to pay for the greed of the few. In fact, really, all creatures are having to pay for the greed of humans. The important element here that I want to go back to is the cords, how they're energetic cords that connect us to people, to places, and even to former lifetimes, the past lives in which we were wounded, we were traumatized. And that trauma creates an energetic connection with the perpetrator. In psychiatry, it's known as the trauma bond. And we see this with people that identify with their captors, the prisoners that begin to identify with the Nazi, or the slaves that begin to identify with the slave owner. So these trauma bonds will follow us from one lifetime to the next. And it's impossible to heal unless we cut those cords. Unless we cut the cords and we find out what they're connected to. Who are they connected to? Are they connected to a person that perhaps we hurt or that hurt us? Are they connected to a place? We have affinities with places also. Places where perhaps we died in a former life, or where we were hurt in a former time in this lifetime. We can have cords connecting us to archetypes. If you studied Jungian psychology or depth psychology, you know that there are archetypes, the gods of old, that are informing the course of our lives. And they inform us not through radio waves or through telepathic communication, but through cords. Energetic cords that are information superhighways. This is what cords are. Information superhighways that begin to organize and influence our experience in our lives. They continue to hijack the moment to create outcomes that are not desirable for us, but that offer us an opportunity for healing, which, given how wounded we are, we're most often not able to take. So the shaman begins by cutting the cords and then using their spirit animals, their power animals, to track what the cord is connected to. Cutting the cord is not enough. It's the beginning, an essential beginning, and then we have to track the origin and the source. And once we identify the source and we witness it, healing occurs. We learn the lesson so we don't have to keep repeating the grade. Today I want to take you to the basics of cord cutting using feathers. And I have with me 2 feathers, and you can use any feather that you're attracted to. Ideally, feathers from a bird that is your power animal. And just let me make a parenthesis here, because the relationship with the power animal is absolutely essential. This is your relationship with the force of nature. We're all familiar with the notion of spirit guides, of angels, of spirit guides that are here to help us and to assist us and to guide us in our lives. Well, we are the spirit guides to our power animals. We're offering them a kind of biological, evolutionary information that to them is spiritual because they have not evolved through those steps yet. And the same with our spirit guides. They're bringing us spiritual guidance, but it's truly biology. Ultimately, there's nothing as spiritual as biology. And this is the pathway to our future evolution as humans continue to evolve into subtler forms. So the connection with the power animal is absolutely essential because they are the trackers. They can help us to find the source of that cord. Where is it connected to? Is it connected? Most often, the trauma bonds are with people that hurt us in a former time. The bonds, the cords that we have with archetypes are a little bit different, and I'm going to leave that for another class to explore more in detail. But I invite you truly to find two feathers that attract you, that call to you, that come to you in some way, and then to call, to summon that spirit animal that they came from. And in doing so, you're going to be acquiring a relationship with that hawk or with that turkey or with the eagle or with a condor. And then they will become your trackers. They will help you find the source of the cord that you're cutting. And not only that, but to understand the lesson. So much the same way that we have guide dogs, guide animals that will help someone who is blind to make their way through a busy intersection or through a city, our power animals are guides that will take us to the source of that cord so that we can receive the lesson. We can witness what occurred, witness where we went unconscious, where we lost consciousness, and witness the trauma bond that ensued. Why do you find yourself attracted to the same kind of man or woman over and over again? There's a cord there. There's a trauma bond that will take you to an incident that occurred in the past in which a particular kind of relationship was installed in your luminous energy field that now you try to find in the outer world. And you've discovered that you continue to have your heart broken or be betrayed or be abandoned or be mistreated over and over again. We have to cut the cord. Tracking the source without cutting the cord only gives you information. We can track the source in therapy, in hypnotherapy, in studying our dreams, but without cutting the cord, we're only going to get insight. And insight by itself is not transformational. We need to cut the energetic cord. We need to cut the toxic connection. You cannot clean your bathtub if there's water coming into it from a sewer. You've got to cut that pipe, that connection to the toxic, so that we can then go about integrating the lesson that life offered to me. Cords are connected to organs or to chakras. Organs or chakras. And if it's a cord that is extended to someone who is not embodied, to a person that perhaps wounded you or that you hurt in a former life, that's generally connected to a chakra. And that spirit is continuing to feed from your life force, because the chakras run in the sweetest, most amazing energy. They're the purest, finest energy in our system. And when you have a cord or a feeding tube connected to one of your chakras, that spirit is still feeding off of your energy. And when you cut that cord, you can go about your healing without being connected and set for an eventual intersection with that person when they're embodied. So again, the practice is two feathers and using them as swords or knives. Now these feathers have a tremendously sharp edge in the spirit world. And I like to work with two of them because I find that I can use them as dual knives, beginning with the chakra, cutting any toxic cords that may be connected or attached to your chakras. And remember that these connections are not conscious for us. very hard for us to track our own cords because they're unconscious. They're unconscious affinities that we have for people, places, situations. So when I find myself being triggered, being reactive with my partner, with my wife, with my associates, with a client, I know that I'm responding to an imprint, to a cord generally that is connected to a story, always connected to a story and always connected to a person, to an archetype, or to an experience. So I'll go and clear all of my chakras. Disconnecting, cutting all those toxic cords that allow others or a situation from the past to continue thriving and festering and feeding from my present. The next thing I want to do is I want to cleanse myself. I want to use those feathers to be sure that there are no sticky webs that I'm getting caught in. And you can do this throughout your entire body, because even if you don't have a thick cord connecting you to a former partner or to someone in your family who died without you being able to say goodbye to them, there are many webs that we're trapped in all the time. There are many situations that are trying to ensnare us, that are trying to, in some way, get something from us that we're not ready to give. So we want to be sure we don't get caught in those webs. Remember that these webs come from other people, or they come from themes and stories that are playing themselves out in the media or in the collective today. And we don't want to be trapped in any of those webs. The web of success, or the web of self-judgment, or the web of criticism from another, where you compromise yourself in exchange for being accepted or liked. Cut all of those connections, cut them. And particularly from your back, from behind. Cutting all of those connections. These connections are particularly fond of our kidneys, because our kidneys is the source of our life force in the physical body. It's where our vital energy gets processed. So these cords will frequently go for, they know where to find their energy. They're like parasites. They'll go and attach themselves to one of your kidneys. And if you're feeling lethargic and we have all of these conditions, from Lyme disease to feeling chronically exhausted to chronic fatigue, that we have diagnostic categories for, but that we don't know how to treat. And many times they're accompanied by, and even sometimes caused by, a toxic cord connecting us to an individual that we had a negative encounter with. Cut the cords. You're not responsible for their healing. You're responsible for your healing and for your health. Cut the toxic connection. Now, something happens the minute that you cut a cord or a feeding tube, is that it rebounds like a rubber band that you cut that's been stretched, and you cut it close to you, and that will rebound to the person that it's connected to. And they will feel that something has happened. So don't be surprised if you get a call that afternoon or the next day from someone you haven't heard from in a while. Say, I was thinking of you, wondering how you're doing. Are you okay? Because that bond, that trauma bond, has been broken. And then you can call on the spirit of that hawk whose feathers you've been working with, or that condor, or that eagle, or that turkey. Turkey, incredible power animals for Native Americans. This is the peace eagle. So the vultures also. And ask your spirit animal to guide you to that original bond. When and where was that cord installed? When did I get trapped in that spider web with that person that I'm so afflicted and affected by, even today? 20 years after I stopped relating to them. I'm still haunted by them. Learn the lesson. Your power animal will take you. Your power animal is your natural instinct. That's the Western way of conceiving of it, of course. For the shaman, they're spirits. They're the spirits of nature. They are the spirits of the anima, of the feminine, of the soul, of the earth, of the animals. The spirit animals are found in every culture, every shamanic tradition. In Christianity, you find that the four evangelists that brought the message of Christ are known as the four power animals. Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Incredible. An eagle, a lamb. So this is across cultures. You find that spirit animals, natures have spirit animals. In America, it's the eagle. You go to Germany, you find a two-headed eagle. You find that every tradition has an identification with the power of nature. And our task is to develop the very direct and immediate relationship with our spirit animal that can help us to track, to find the source, because the source of this trauma resides in that region that Carl Jung called the shadow. It goes into the unconscious. And we recognize it in the other, but we don't recognize it in ourselves. Jung believed that it was impossible for us to become conscious of our shadow. Shamans believe otherwise. They believe that our spirit animals can help us to track our instinct. When it's awakened and finely tuned, can help us find these places within us after we cut the toxic cords where we need to learn a lesson. And once we receive the gift of the lesson, then healing happens. We don't have to try to learn through the next lover or through the next job or through the next boss or the next child. We can learn within our own container of our field and no longer be caught in toxic relationships with others. And occasionally, of course, we find that we'll have a cord connected to an archetype, to one of the gods of old. And again, the word archetype was introduced by Jung. What he did was to sanitize all of the old Greek gods of old and make them psychological entities that influence the course of our human destiny. In another lesson, we're going to explore what happens when we're in the grip of an archetype and how do we cut the cords to this force that is so great that we, in the past, conceived of it as a god. Thank you for joining me in the Shaman's View, and practice with your tools. Develop these into your powerful healing tools.